You're probably aware that California recently had blackouts. I read the stories about how this happened, and I'm here to tell you that you're being bamboozled, which also means I don't think California will fix this totally fixable problem anytime soon. And I'll explain that too. I'm here to de-bamboozle you. First, let me mention I'm an investment advisor, so if you want to work together managing your portfolio, please reach out to me at ken@investhuckleberry.com, and please subscribe to this channel. The heat wave in California was the proximate cause, like the last snowflake before the avalanche. By focusing on that last snowflake that caused the avalanche, that avoids any scrutiny on how the situation was able to get so unstable in the first place. California had blackouts because the state of California doesn't have enough generating capacity. It's very simple. So why isn't this the main message? There's a story in the New York Times that's a naked attempt to bamboozle you, and I can't wait to get to it. But a little background first, which will make it totally clear to you. This is really interesting. So let's take a look at the raw data. This is a big picture breakdown on the current energy supply in California on a particular day. You can see that it's roughly 1/3 renewables, mostly wind and solar, 1/3 natural gas, and the rest is an assortment, and I'll highlight that 21% of the total is imports. I'll also highlight that the battery contribution rounds to 0, and we'll get back to that. California has what's called an Independent Systems Operator, or ISO for short. The ISO coordinates and monitors the power generating assets in the state, and the ISO knows what generating assets exist and when and how they can be used in order to balance the grid. So let's go down the list and examine how much control over these sources of electricity the California ISO has. The ISO can't control how much power is generated by renewables. Other than knowing how much is installed, the ISO obviously can't manipulate the sun or the wind. Regarding natural gas, think about when you grill outside. You can turn on and turn up a gas-powered grill pretty quickly. So this is a key fuel that they're able to control and fine-tune if demand spikes or troughs. And what about coal? If your grill is charcoal fired, you know that you can't quickly turn that up or down. That's why coal is mostly used as a baseload power, and nuclear is the same way. Hydro is fairly static with minor exceptions, and batteries, well, you see they're at 0. Next, we're looking at the supply trend over the course of a day. The green line is renewables, and I'll draw your attention to the late afternoon. This is the key period, between 5 and 9 p.m. at night. At that point, you will see the renewables drop off sharply as the sun and wind generation sharply decline. As this happens, the ISO increases power generation using the only thing that it can control, natural gas powered turbines. But that's not enough, as you see. They need to go hat in hand to their neighbors who are producing power with coal and natural gas, and California buys power from them. So when there's an event that increases the demand for power in both California and its neighbors, like a heat wave, then imports are unavailable and there's a shortage, and it's totally predictable and the result of mismanagement. California needs this power in order to function like a first world country, but California doesn't control its own access to it. Let's look at the Sacramento Bee story last month. Governor Gavin Newsom says the shortages are unacceptable, that he's accountable, and that it can't happen again. Okay, fine. Let's look at this one. Newsom says, quote, "We failed to predict and plan these shortages," end quote. We? Who is the we in that statement? Newsom orders an investigation as if no one understands what happened, and I'm shortly going to show you that's not true. Now, here's an important quote from the California ISO chief executive, who says that the ISO has been warning the Public Utility Commission for months, if not years, that shortages would occur if they didn't accrue enough power in advance. Here's a story from the East Bay Times that highlights the previous warnings from the ISO. This is a picture of what the ISO looks like, and the author calls the ISO a kind of air traffic controller for energy markets. The article says blackouts are not a surprise and highlights a meeting in September. And this article was written in August, so they're talking about September of 2019, where Rothletter of the California ISO points out what we were just talking about regarding demand peaking while renewable generation declines every day, and says they make up the gap by importing power, but if there's a heat wave, the exporters will need the power for themselves, and then there will be a shortage, which is the exact scenario that happened. And finally, here's a story from the New York Times. We could see based on the title, I thought they were on the right track. The title is "Poor Planning Left California Short of Electricity in a Heat Wave." The New York Times story paints a picture of mystery and confusion in a number of ways. Primarily, they highlight that there was a bunch of capacity that was offline, even though California knew there was a heat wave coming and it should have been online, and that California's records were not accurate regarding what generating assets were even available. The story says that 15% of the grid's generating capacity was reported as being offline. Then they mention a pandemic and wildfires as if to paint a dramatic picture of a perfect storm. But they concede right off the bat that even if the capacity had been available, the state would probably still have struggled to provide enough electricity. And why? You know why, but here is what the New York Times says is why. Quote, "That's because the manager of the grid and state regulators were relying on power plants that either had permanently shut down or could not have realistically achieved the targets set for them." End quote. You see what they did there? They say that California doesn't have enough capacity because their own numbers are wrong in their spreadsheet. No mention of California's dangerous necessity to buy power from its neighbors, if they even have it to spare. What I would ask is, if the numbers are wrong, meaning that they're showing generating assets that have already been shut down, and they're inflating the generating capacity of the ones that remain, then why are they wrong? Are these just honest mistakes that all happen to go in the same direction, and it's the direction that justifies that there isn't a necessity to build more natural gas-fired power plants, which is a conclusion that would be embraced by the politicians, or have these numbers been deliberately misrepresented? Our next slide here shows continued focus on confusion regarding California not knowing what generating assets were available, and also California believing they had generating capacity that they didn't. This is not the fundamental cause of the instability, even if it's true. They're trying to fool you. Only here in paragraph 11, paragraph number 11, they do provide a passing mention to what I've been showing you and what the California ISO has been saying. That, quote, "Neither the grid operator nor state energy regulators have offered a clear and detailed explanation of why California was so short of power. They have broadly attributed the energy shortage on their inability to secure more electricity from other states and sources," end quote. That sounds like a clear explanation to me. He starts a later paragraph with the phrase, "even more baffling," as if this is just one big ball of confusion that's been dropped from the sky. The article spends a lot of time highlighting the technical realities and risks of extending the lives of nuclear plants and other generating assets. And here, towards the end of the article, they mention in passing what we've been talking about. The California ISO depends heavily on power imported into its system, but the heat wave engulfing the West has increased demand in those states too, tying up some resources. And then they mention climate change before finally wrapping up the article with a simple and concise explanation from the ISO chief executive, where he says it's simply a matter of raw capacity. So if you read that article because you wanted to understand what's happening, I think you would have finished the article thinking wildfires, Climate change, mismanagement from the system's operator. They've got all their numbers wrong. There is an investigation, so it sounds like no one knows what's going on over there. But somewhere in your mind, you would probably wonder, gee, I wonder how the neighboring states have been able to do it. The answer is simple. Those neighboring states have spent billions of dollars on natural gas-powered assets so that when there's a heat wave, their ratepayers will use that electricity and it's not available to sell to California. So why hasn't California built the capacity? I can only guess it's because no politician wants to be building natural gas-fired plants. Even though natural gas is way cleaner than coal, it's still a fossil fuel. But they're not building natural gas capacity, and they're also not installing batteries, if they even exist on that scale at the moment. It's politically unpalatable, not only because of environmental concerns, but because no matter which way California goes, either building natural gas capacity or using huge-scale batteries, the cost of power to Californians who already pay 60% more than the rest of the country, 60% more than the rest of the country, the cost to Californians will go even higher. And of course, if they don't do either of those things, then we'll have more blackouts sometime in the future. This scenario was specifically warned about. All this confusion is an effort to bamboozle you. Renewable sources of electricity are intermittent and have to be backed up with natural gas generation. The only way this isn't the case is if battery storage is rolled out and installed like we've never seen before. I'm not a battery expert, but I will tell you that battery technology doesn't progress like semiconductors. Moore's law observes that the number of transistors on a microchip doubles roughly every 2 years. That's extremely rapid. Battery technology makes some incremental advances over time. And it's estimated that lithium-ion capacity, for example, has increased at around 8% per year since its introduction in 1991. And by the way, the latest and greatest battery technology that's going to solve all the world's problems is always promised to be right around the corner. That said, there are credible people who argue that we are reaching a period where massive battery storage is feasible. So I'll only say that from 30,000 feet, maybe it's possible. This will be expensive, and here's another wrinkle. The renewable generation doesn't only fluctuate during each day, it fluctuates over the course of a year. On this graph, we see that renewable generation in California is highest in the April through August period and then drops off for the rest of the year. So they have to consider at least 2 cycles, charging and discharging massive batteries over the course of each day, and also charging and discharging over the course of a year. So we need to store lots of extra power in giant batteries in May that we're going to use in December. Whether the solution is billions of dollars worth of batteries or billions of dollars in natural gas plants, the state can only get companies to spend that money if it agrees to provide a return on those billions. And that means power prices are going higher, or we'll just wait for the next round of blackouts. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.